Lisa,
Yes, baby girl.
when I grow up, I want to be a menace to society.
Then so shall you be. Hey, this is Lisa Landry. Welcome back to A Menace to Society. I am so beside myself excited about today's guest. As you know, we've spoken with a lot of moms who have lost custody for reporting abuse throughout the country. But now we have a guest on today's show with a happy ending. Please welcome Rachel Bruno.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm doing so well. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here. You have a happy ending to a very horrible story.
I do. And, this happened back in 2015. And I know I'm one of the lucky ones, which is why I have made it my mission to expose the system. Because I know too many families out there who are not as fortunate as I was.
Yeah, how did this go down?
Yeah. So just a little background on myself. I have epilepsy, seizures, which are triggered by sleep deprivation or interrupted sleep. So for all you new mamas out there, if you have a newborn, you ain't sleeping.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you went through that. That's horrible.
Yeah. So, as part of my planning, my doctor suggested that I get somebody to watch my child at night so that I could at least get the 8 hours of sleep.
Okay.
So I did that, went through research, referrals, background checks, found somebody who was willing to take the night shift from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. And she seemed like a very nice lady, a young mom herself. And she started taking care of my newborn when he was about 7 days old. And this is back in July of 2015. When he was 7 weeks old, I woke up to him screaming at about 4 o'clock in the morning. And, it's been almost 2 months with this lady, no issues prior. And I looked at the clock, 4 o'clock. Okay, she's either feeding him or changing him, something to that regard.
Right.
And the crying stopped. So I'm like, okay, yeah, try to go back to sleep. Then about 10 minutes later, start screaming again. Then stopped, then started. So this went on for about 30 minutes until I finally got up. And I went to his bedroom. She had him swaddled inside the crib. And she was kind of shushing him next to his ear and rocking him back and forth. And the door was partially open. She didn't really make eye contact with me. And when she saw that he was not settling down, just screaming, she picked him up and put him on her shoulder in a burp position. And that's when I entered the room. I'm like, is something wrong? And she said, I just fed him. He took the bottle and he's really gassy. And I figured, okay, this is my second child. Babies do get gassy and they do scream like crazy. And at this point, I was home alone. My husband was on a business trip. I had my 20-month-old son who was sleeping directly across the hall. And I did not want to wake up my 20-month-old. So I told her that she could leave and I would be with the baby. I would stay with the baby since I was already up anyway. So she left the house at that point, and I unswaddled my son, looked at his body, no rashes, no fever, nothing really visible that I could tell. So I unswaddled him. I gave him skin to skin, and that seemed to calm him down. So I figured, okay, you just wanted your mommy.
So this is all normal. This is a lady you trust.
Yeah.
It's your second child. Your husband's out of town. You've got this condition where it's imperative that you get your rest. You have 2 children to take care of. You have this woman helping you out in the home. You think this is just a weird experience. Everything's cool. My baby's settling down. And that's where you are.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So I go to my room, and he falls asleep on my chest. So again, I think I dozed off. Next thing I know, it's probably about 7 a.m., and I wake up to him screaming again. And I'm like, okay, last feeding 4 o'clock, 7 o'clock, you're hungry.
Right.
So I tried to nurse him, and he would not latch on whatsoever. We never had issues before. But I she kind of jaded my mind with the gassy comment, right?
Mm-hmm,
So I'm just thinking he's gassy, not hungry, colicky. I start Googling, Dr. Google to the rescue. And colic, nursing, gassy, what is wrong with this kid? So long story short, 6 hours later, my son had refused to nurse. Anytime I laid him down for a nap, he would just scream. And if I picked him up and held him, he was okay. So I knew something was wrong, didn't know what. And my husband, like I said, out of town. I have my 20-month-old by myself. My mom was with her husband, who was having cataract surgery. So it was like the perfect storm, right?
Yeah, you're like this island by yourself, yeah.
Right. So I called my mom. I begged her. I'm like, Mom, please find somebody to take, Marty, my stepdad, after the surgery and come over here so that I can call the pediatrician. So she comes over. I call the pediatrician. I tell the receptionist what the symptoms are, and she said the doctor wasn't available until 3 o'clock that afternoon. And I told her, no, my son's been screaming since 4 o'clock this morning. I need to see somebody. Then she said, well, take him to the emergency room. So I did. At this point, 6 hours later, my mom also examined him, and she's like, Rachel, I don't know what's wrong with him, but he just looks like he's in a lot of pain. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. So we put him in the car, and of course, on our drive to the hospital, he falls asleep, stops crying, and we're like, great, right? The doctor's going to think I'm this crazy, overreactive mother.
Mm-hmm.
So I get to the hospital and, go to the emergency room, tell them their symptoms. They take his vitals, no fever. Blood pressure seems normal. Everything's okay. But they do take me directly into the back room, and the pediatrician comes and tells me to lay him down flat on the bed. I do, and he walks away. I'm thinking, okay, weird, where's he going? And he stops just short of the doorway, probably about 10 feet away. And he's just staring at my son, like laser focused on my son. Everybody's quiet in the room. I'm like, okay, this is weird. Then he starts walking towards my son, and he goes straight to his ear on his head, right behind his left ear. And he's like, did you feel this? I said, no. So he grabs my hand, and he makes me touch it. He's like, you feel that bulge? I said, yeah. Like, that's fluid that's leaking from his brain.
This is so scary.
Yeah. So I was just in shock. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Like, the fluid can be spinocerebral fluid, or it can be blood. And if it's blood, the brain hates blood. So at this point, when he says that, like 6 nurses charge into that room. They start intubating my son. They start putting a bunch of patches on him. They raise up the rails. I'm holding him, and they start running to the CT room. And as they're going to the CT room, his right arm starts twitching.
Oh, my gosh.
And then those ladies are bolting. And I'm like, I look at the nurse, like, is this normal? She's like, no. And then that's when I get my first realization because of my seizures. I'm like, left side of the brain, right arm twitching, he's having a seizure. So as scary as that was, my first thought is, oh, my God, I pass this down to my son.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm like, I say a little prayer for my son. I say, Lord, please spare my son. Have mercy on my son from having to live with this like I have for my whole life. And when we get to the CT room, the doctors say, hook him up. We'll call you when the results come back. I go back to my mom who's in the waiting room with my 20-month-old son. We just start texting everybody. Our family's in Brazil. My husband is on an airplane, not knowing anything that's going on. And we're just telling everybody to pray. We don't know what's going on. Right. So the doctor come back, and he said, Miss Bruno? I'm like, yeah. So he takes me to the back where all the computers are. He said, this is very serious. I'm like, okay. Like, the fluid that was leaking was blood, and it was caused by a cranial fracture. So your son has a cranial fracture and an intracerebral blood hemorrhage. And again, I'm still in shock, still processing this. Like, I went from gassy baby to now my son is going to brain surgery. The doctors are making me sign all the forms, asking me if I have anything against blood transfusions. I'm like, I don't care what you have to do, save my son. So they wheel him off, and I'm just there with my mom in shock. At this point, I hadn't really connected the dots. The word fracture to me didn't really process as, broken bone. I just thought he was newborn. I know their craniums aren't completely formed yet at that point. So, and the bleeding, so I'm like, was it an aneurysm that caused one of those flaps to pop open? And that's why he has the seizures? I was thinking a million things. Never in my mind did it cross my mind that this was, something that might have been done maliciously. So the surgery went well. About 4 hours later, the neurosurgeon comes to me, tells me clinically everything went well. We were able to drain the blood and fix the fracture. However, he started having a lot of seizures after the procedure, so he's currently in a medically induced coma, and we don't know whether he's going to survive the next 48 hours. So I'm listening to this, and I'm processing. I'm trying not to freak out. My son is there. My 20-month-old son is there. My mom is there, and he's like, you want to go see him? So he takes me up to the ICU, to the PICU at this point. And he's there, head wrapped in gauze, tubes coming out of every orifice of his body, the machine's beeping, and just very cold, sterile environment if you've ever been to a hospital like that.
My son was actually in NICU for the first 2 weeks of his life. We didn't have this experience that you're talking about, but I don't think the average parent understands the vulnerability that you feel when your child is hooked up to tubes and they don't know what's going on or how it happened. I am so sorry that you're going through this at this point. And what happens next?
So I called my friend to take my mom and my son home, right, because I obviously wasn't going to leave the hospital at this point. And my husband is still on an airplane, not knowing what's going on. So my mom leaves, and I just pray for my son again. The doctor told me doesn't know whether he's going to survive the next 48 hours. And prior to these two sons, I had miscarriages, and I had issues because of my seizures. My pregnancies were very high risk. So I remember praying, I'm like, God, you gave him to me, right? I prayed for him. Please don't take him away from me. If I have to dedicate the rest of my life to taking care of my son, I will. Just don't take him away from me. And at that point, just the Holy Spirit in me, I heard it, in my heart, and it said, he's mine. He's mine. I gave him to you. Nobody's going to take him away from you. And I just had peace, right? The peace that surpasses understanding. And I was okay at that point. I said, you're right, God. He's in your hands. No better place for my son to be than in your hands. So I was sitting down, and next thing I know, a man in uniform and a lady with a clipboard knock on the door. And as you know, those doors are all glass, right? Everybody can see you. So they knock on the door, and I'm like, yes, can we talk to you? I said, yeah. Thought it was weird. Why is a police officer here in the hospital with me? First things out of his mouth was, what happened to your son was worse than getting shot in the head by a bullet.
Oh, my God.
And I'm like, wow, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, are you insinuating that this person tried to kill my son? What else would a bullet to the head do? So he's like, we want to help you find out how this happened to your son. Will you help us? So at this point, I'm thinking, okay, so he obviously knows it was the nanny, right? And he's telling me they want to help me.
Right.
So
you're thinking hand that rocks the cradle. Right. You're thinking, I'm in some kind of weird, twisted horror movie type of thing.
Yeah. So I sit down with them and talk to them, tell them the whole saga from 4 o'clock in the morning, tell them about the nanny. And then, after all that was done, the social worker asked me, do you have any other children? I do. Like, where is he? He's with my mom at my mom's house, probably sleeping at this point. It's 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night. She said, is it okay if we go see him? Now, again, at this point, these people are helping me. I have nothing to hide. So I said, yeah, go ahead. Go to my mom's house. I called my mom, gave the social worker her address, and the social worker leaves at this point. And then the police officer starts questioning me, why did it take you so long to bring him to the hospital? I'm like, because I didn't know what was going on. She told me he was gassy. She's like, why didn't you call 911? And I'm like, again, I didn't know what was going on with my son. And he's like, why did you bring him to a hospital in LA County when you live in Orange County? I'm like, because this is the hospital that I knew. So just little things like this, and he's jotting it down, and I'm still not registering anything. I'm thinking about my son. My son is, in a medically induced coma. My husband is in the airplane. I'm like, I'm not thinking anything right now.
Well, you probably, you didn't sleep last night either. You were awakened in the middle of the morning to go take care of a newborn child, and you're concerned about your baby, so you're not getting great rest when you go back into your sleep. And then you had this day of trauma, just nonstop trauma. Yeah.
So he's like, okay. So at about 10 o'clock, my husband comes straight from the airport to the hospital. And when he gets to the hospital, the same police officer is there waiting. And he tells me, can you go to the other room for the detectives? They're on their way. And the detectives want to speak to you as well. So I'm like, sure. So I go into another room. Then he takes my husband into another room to go, quote unquote, speak to my husband. So hindsight is 20/20. Now we can kind of see what they're doing, right? Putting us in separate rooms. interviewing us separately and seeing if we have our story straight. So I wait for the detectives, and they interrogate me till 2 o'clock in the morning. So like you said, I'd been up since 4 o'clock the morning before, didn't get any sleep, and then it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I tell them, I'm like, I really need to go to sleep. You know, we can continue this on later today if you would like, but I need to go to sleep. So they let me go to sleep, and at that point, something had already happened. My husband knew about it. He didn't tell me because he knew how much stress I was under, and he told me to go to sleep. So a few hours later, about 10 a.m., I wake up, and he's just staring at me, blank, staring at me. My first instinct is to look over at the baby, like, he's fine. What's wrong? What happened? And my husband tells me they took David. And David is my 20-month-old son at the time. I said, what do you mean they took David? Who? Where? How? And they're like, we don't know where he is. Social workers showed up to your mom's house with the cops at 2 o'clock in the morning. So while I was being interrogated by the detectives, they were already at my mom's house at 2 o'clock in the morning. And they told my mom that we are going to take David. My mom says, no, you're not. Like, well, if you don't give him to us, you're going to get arrested. And at this point, they had no warrant. They had no court order. My mom had not committed any crime. The social worker admitted there was no signs of abuse with my 20-month-old. But they're going to take him anyway. And my mom says, if I go to jail, do I take him with me? Social worker said, no, he's going to go to foster care, and you're not going to be able to care for him because you're going to have a criminal record. So 2 o'clock in the morning, my dad is calling lawyers at 2 o'clock in the morning. We don't know what the heck to do. The police officer is standing right there. The social worker says backup is coming. And my son at this point is starting to, notice something weird is going on. Starting to cry, starting to get anxious, and my mom had no choice. My mom felt like she had no choice but to give my son to the social worker.
I don't want to stop your story. I'm so sorry that this is happening because I don't think the average, the average person I don't think the average person can really wrap their head around the fact that there are people at your mother's house in the middle of the night taking a child into their custody, traumatizing your child whose little baby brother is already at the hospital all day with mommy. Daddy's out of town. His step-granddaddy, who for all intents and purposes is his granddaddy, is recovering from surgery. This is all happening to your child. Like, not only is this happening to you and your husband and your mother and your stepdaddy, but this is happening to a traumatized 20-month-old baby.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, my mom, she to this day, can't talk about it. And she says she urinated herself on the sidewalk.
Yeah, of course she did.
She saw the social worker take my son away screaming, kicking and screaming in her car, not telling us where he was going.
Yeah, that's some Sophie Choice stuff. Like that, it's the stuff you see in films. It's the stuff you see on TV,
right.
But it doesn't really happen to the lady next door.
Right.
Yeah, or you.
Right.
Yeah.
So that morning, my husband is calling the social worker, and she's not answering our phone calls. The supervisor isn't returning our phone calls. We have no idea where our son is. And I'm just speechless. I'm in shock. I'm like, what country am I living in? Like, is this just Gestapo Germany? What the heck is going on? Mm-hmm. So he's, calling the social workers, and I'm calling lawyers. I probably called about 10 lawyers till I found one that was willing to take our case. So I go to the office. I go to his office that same day, and I tell him what happened. And I'm like, okay, so this is some kind of sick miscommunication or some kind of joke. Where is my son, and where can I go pick him up? And he kind of slams his hand on the table. He's like, you have no idea what you're in for.
Yeah.
Like, listen to me. Listen to me. This is not a joke. And I'm in shock. I'm like, okay. He says, they're not giving your kid back to you. I'm like, I didn't do this. And he's like, doesn't matter. This is family court. And I'm like, what happened to the Constitution? What happened to innocent until proven guilty? What about the nanny? What the heck? They can't just take your kids away. He's like, yes, they can. This is family court. They don't follow the Constitution. They can do, quote, whatever is in the best interest of the child, right? And I'm like, this is crazy. So what are you telling me? I'm not going to get my kids back. He's like, if they're under 2 years old and nonverbal, they can be legally adopted by the foster family if the case lasts longer than 6 months. And they will make it last longer than 6 months.
Oh, yeah, they'll stretch it out. They'll bleed you dry, and they will make sure that they can get that money on the back end slaving your child.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I'm like, but I didn't do this. Like, I believe you. I believe you. But it doesn't matter. Okay? I'm not even going to fight for you because they're not going to give the kids back to you, and it's a criminal investigation. What happened to your son is criminal. And I'm just taking all this in. He's like, your saving grace was that your husband was out of town when this happened. So legally speaking, he wasn't even at the crime scene. We're going to ask the judge to give sole custody to your husband. That way they don't even risk going into foster care. But chances are they're going to kick you out of the house. So at this point, what are my options? Right? Fight for my right and get my children taken and placed with strangers? Or kind of play their game, right? Play along and let my children be with their father.
You're at this point where, you can either walk away from your children and leave them in the care of your husband, probably have to get a divorce.
No, thankfully we didn't.
Okay, so what happened next?
So my attorney tells me those are my options. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I'm like, I don't care what happens to me at this point, right? I'm the adult. I just want my children to be safe. And I sure as heck don't want them being adopted by strangers.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, we'll do that then. So I go back to the hospital, tell my husband this is our plan. Everybody is in absolute shock. Everybody, what about the nanny? What is this? I know, but those are our options. So we had the hearing 3 days later. And this was during the weekend. So, of course, I couldn't, really get a hold of anybody. But my lawyer told me before the hearing, I need you to get as many character letters as you can. Right, from everybody from people at church, from the doctors, from the schools, anything you can do. And I was able to get 23 character letters in that weekend and be able to present it to the judge. And I go to the courthouse thinking, what we see on Law and Order, right? There's going to be a jury, there's going to be witnesses, there's going to be cross-examination, there's going to be all this stuff happening.
Right, of course you're going to get justice because this is America and you're right. Exactly. And you're a mommy and this is just it's a misunderstanding. It's going to be sorted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I go in thinking, this lawyer's crazy. I'm like, this is not going to happen to me. Justice is going to be served. And I walk into that courtroom and it's just the children's lawyers, the social workers' lawyers, my lawyers, and the judge. And I'm sitting on one side of the courtroom. My husband and my lawyers are sitting on the other side of the courtroom. So I'm kind of like by myself in the corner, already placed as the guilty party, right?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it's mind control.
And, yeah.
Yep.
And they're talking to the judge. I never got to say a word in that courtroom. The judge never asked me what happened. The judge never asked me about the nanny. The social workers never asked about the nanny. Nothing was ever said.
Well,
the only thing that was said, Your Honor, these are the charges or the allegations, and our solution is to give the children to the father, and that's it. So the judge asked everybody, is everybody in agreement? And they said yes, except for social services. They did object to giving the children to their father. And by the grace of God, the judge overruled and said, okay, the children will go to their father. Ms. Bruno, you have 24 hours to vacate your home, and a caseworker will be contacting you with visitation and your safety plan. And that was it. The whole thing took maybe about 10 to 15 minutes.
So in 10 to 15 minutes, you lost custody of the two children you bore, both of whom were under the age of 2. That's very, very, very much tender age where an infant and a young person needs their mommy, especially both parents, if possible. Yeah, of course, but especially need mommy literally to survive because you've got one breastfeeding infant who is now taken out of your care.
Right. Yes. And I'm like, people, like you said, people can't picture this, right? Can't imagine everything unless, in 12 hours, your whole life has completely turned upside down.
And meanwhile, this woman who is probably responsible for harming your infant, has she been arrested at this point? Is she being interrogated by the social workers or the cops?
Nothing.
Okay. All right.
Nothing. So when I went to the hearing, we did have the court reports, and the police visited her once, and basically they believed her and didn't believe me. That's what it comes down to.
Right, because the mom wants to hurt her baby, but not some woman who's
Right.
annoyed because a newborn child woke her in the middle of the night.
Right. And she said, when she left, that the baby was perfectly fine. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, why the heck? I'm paying you, right, to take care of my child. Why would I let you go home early if my child is completely fine?
Right.
But that's what it was. And later on, during this process, I did have to get a private investigator because my attorney was sure that we were going to go to trial. So he's making me do all this stuff, like polygraphs, psychiatric evaluation. The private investigator went to go see if she could find anything on the nanny, and there weren't any red flags except for the fact that she was married to a cop.
Oh, here we go.
Which she did not tell me.
Okay.
And it's not something I would have questioned anyway.
Of course you wouldn't, because why would you hold whomever somebody is married to against their job possibilities? But wait a minute. Also, for the listeners who are enjoying this travesty, that's a lot of money. A private investigator costs ducats. So does getting a psych evaluation. All of these things you've mentioned, you have to shell out that money yourself.
Exactly.
And you're paying legal fees.
Right, paying legal fees. And at this point, we had actually saved up enough money for a down payment. We were actually planning to buy a house at that point in our lives.
Oh.
So, all things, God knows why we had all that money stacked away.
Right, and this is your baby, so you're going to spend everything you have, whatever you don't have, whatever you can get your hands on to protect your baby.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's one thing I will tell the listeners. Do not get do not get a public defender. Okay, these are your children's lives at stake. And if you have to sell your car, if you have to beg your family, whatever you need to do, get a private attorney. Because, unfortunately, the public defenders are in cahoots. The judge, the social workers, they all consider themselves colleagues. And you don't want to piss off your colleagues. Unfortunately, that's how it works.
Right. A lot of lawyers won't even take cases like yours. And like other moms and dads who are fighting back because they don't want their reputation sullied and they don't want to hurt their friends. It's like in every industry. Basically, it's every industry. But we're talking about children here who are absolutely vulnerable and defenseless being slaved.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people won't help you. Yeah.
Right. So I got kicked out of my house. I was given 7 hours of monitored visitation with both my sons.
Oh, my Lord.
I was court-ordered to take child abuse class, a parenting class, and individual counseling. And again, I'm paying for all of this.
Right. And they're using these records against you, by the way, the whole time you're doing it.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So I'm doing everything they tell you to do, right? That's what they do, make you jump through all these hoops in order to get your children back, when I should have never had them taken away to begin with, right?
Yeah. It's an industry. It's a racket.
It is. So I'm doing everything, and the 7 hours monitored visitation, and my son, after 12 days in the PICU, he was stable enough to go home.
Praise God.
Now he's going to go home too, right? My husband and I owned a business at this point. We had a cybersecurity business. I have an MBA. I have a business degree, and my husband is an internet security engineer. And now he's going to have to take care of a newborn who had just had brain surgery and was having seizures.
And needs his mommy.
And needs his mommy, and a toddler who, of course, is completely traumatized now.
Yep.
Who also needs his mommy.
Yep.
And we're like, where am I supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? And my family in Brazil. Okay, I'm an only child. I have no brothers and sisters here. They wouldn't let me live with my mom because my mom was with my son when they seized him. So she's part of the abuse circle. That's what they call it. And we had no family. We had nothing here. So my cousin, who is a dentist in Brazil, and my aunt, who has never been to America, the 30 years that I've lived here, told me, we're coming. Okay, we will come and we will take care of your children. So God just placed all these people in my life right at the right time. And I had so much support around me. I think that's another thing, that made me able to endure and to persevere during all this, was the community, the family, the love that I felt. Like, it was the worst of times, it was the best of times. Because I'd never felt so loved in my life. people gathered all around me and did everything they could to help me, which was amazing. So my cousin left her dentistry practice, came here to America with my aunt to take care of my sons while I was removed from my house.
Oh, my gosh.
And this occurred for 40 days and 40 nights. I was kicked out of the house for 40 days and 40 nights. On the 40th day, we had a hearing. And my attorney said, don't even bother coming. The criminal investigation is still open. The status of your investigation hasn't changed. Nothing's going to happen today. And I'm like, okay, well, he's been right about everything so far. And so I told my husband, and my husband's like, I don't care what he says. We're going. So we go to the courthouse, and about 2 hours later, my attorney calls me, where are you? I'm at the courthouse. Like, okay, I'm on my way. Might be able to do something today. And then he hangs up on me. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Again, start texting everybody. Everybody just start praying. Something's going to happen. He comes in. I go hug him. He pushes me away. He's like, don't hug me. I can't make you any promises. I'm like, okay. So he goes into the courtroom. Again, I never stepped foot in that courtroom. I never got to say one word to defend myself. He goes in and he walks out, gives me a stack of papers, sign this, initial this. He scratches out some things on the forms, and at this point, I don't know what the heck I'm signing. I'm just trusting God and my attorney at this point. Comes in and out, in and out. About 3 hours later, he comes with a huge stack of papers. He's like, okay, if you're willing to sign the document the way it is today, there's nothing in here admitting that you did this. There is no admission of guilt. It's just the timeline. It's the history of the services that you've completed and, the investigation. They are willing to let you go home today if you sign this today. So at this point, if they had told me to chop off my leg, I would have done it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I just wanted to be home with my children because, that was one of the most painful things I've ever gone through in my life was being without my children. My newborn, I was just getting to know. And my son, David, my 20-month-old, it was like ripping a Band-Aid off every time I went to go visit him for 1 hour and then had to leave. Right? And not being able to tell him why, not being able to tell him what's going on, not being able to tell him when I'm going home, and having a social worker around your shoulder every time.
Right, because you can't talk to your child because there's somebody present taking notes who does not want you to succeed. They don't want you reunited because it's going to imperil their reputation. And some of these people are engaging in literal criminal activity because they're perjuring themselves before the judge.
Right.
And they're not giving the full information, and they are actually withholding information from the judge.
Right.
Yeah. So, you can't even tell your child what's going on to help your child make sense of the situation so your kid doesn't know what end is up. Yeah. I'm sorry.
What's
That's painful.
On?
Yeah.
It is. I'm like he has these two strangers. They were my cousin and my aunt, but he didn't know them.
Right.
Right? So he has these two women come take care of him. I see mommy 1 hour a day, and then she leaves and doesn't tell me where she's going or why she's going and when she's coming back.
Doesn't mommy love me? Yeah. What's going on?
Right.
What did I do? Mm-hmm.
Yep. So, with all that in mind, I'm like, I'll sign it. Let me go home today. Yes. So I went home that night, and the case was still open. They put us on what they call family maintenance, which is when the social worker comes to your house every month and writes up a report for the 6-month review. So I'm like, I don't care. Yeah, come live with me. I'll show you what I'm like and what my family's like. I don't care.
Right.
So I went home and still taking the court-ordered services, child abuse, parenting, individual counseling, and during those child abuse classes, like right from the beginning, I'm like, what the heck am I going to do in a child abuse class? Right? Am I going to be in there with a bunch of drug addicts, alcoholics, domestic abusers? What am I doing in a child abuse class?
Mm-hmm.
And when I get there, much to my surprise, everybody is in the same boat that I am. And people are telling their stories, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what? Like, why? This is crazy. And there were instances of accidents. An 18-year-old had a child. His daughter slipped in the bathtub. Baby hit her arm on the side of the bathtub. Broke her arm. He takes her to the emergency room, tells them what happened, and because there was more than one fracture, they said it was child abuse. So they took away the baby. And here's an 18-year-old kid, right, who of course can't afford an attorney.
Right.
And is with a public defender, and went just like me. I guess fractured bones, child abuse is a crime, as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So they tell him, instead of 15 years in jail, let's just tell the judge that you're sorry for what happened and you'll take responsibility and you'll do 2 years instead of 15. So they took away the child, and he went to jail for 2 years. Comes out of jail with a criminal record. Can't find a job, of course. And they use that against him, of course, and they won't give him his daughter back. There was another case of a stepdad whose 15-year-old daughter was posting naked pictures of herself on Instagram. And he took away the car, he grounded her, took away the phone, and one night on his graveyard shift, he's scrolling, and there she is posting naked pictures of herself on her friend's account with a bunch of grown men asking sexual favors of these 15-year-old girls. So when he gets home that night, he spanks her. He's like, I don't know what else to do with you. I've taken everything away. No, you do not do this. And then what does she do? She calls her criminal biological father, who tells her, you want to get rid of him? Call the police and tell them that he hit you. And that's what she did. So this stepfather, who's trying to protect his stepdaughter and discipline her in some way, he gets arrested, and all the younger siblings get taken away as well. So I'm just witnessing this racket. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, what? What is this? And I just home alone, right? I'm without my family. I'm without my husband, my children. I was just home alone in bed, and I'm praying. I'm like, God, what is this? I was actually told to repent at one point by somebody very close to me. And I'm like, hey, didn't Job's friends have something similar? And I'm like, okay, God, who sinned? Right? Was it me? Was it my husband? What the heck is this? And I remember hearing it that night. That's what completely changed my perspective, is that it's just the fallen world that we live in, right? This is about the destruction of the family, which is what the devil has been trying to do from the beginning of time, right? It's the destruction of the family. And I have placed you in here so that you can witness this, so that he who has eyes can see and she who has ears can hear. And that's the point that I knew this wasn't in vain, right? Everything that I was going through was going to be used for a greater purpose and for God's glory, and to help all these families that are victimized by this crazy system. So after I got back home, after the 6 months were over, the social worker actually recommended that our case be closed. And we went to court 6 months later. The judge closed the case, and that was it. So I could have gone on with my happy life, right? Mm-hmm. I got my children back. Thank God. My son, Lucas, was perfect. No brain damage. He stopped having the seizures after 1 year. He's off of epileptic drugs completely nowadays. He's 4 years old. My 20-month-old son, David, was, of course, traumatized. He kept rejecting me. He kept saying, I don't want you, Mommy. I want to go live with my grandma. And, like, anytime I would leave my mom's house, he would just scream and, like, tremor. It was crazy. It wasn't a normal tantrum. It was trauma. It was really trauma.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and at one point, I'm like, I know he's the victim, right? He's the child. He's suffering. But I was the victim, too. And I'm like, these words hurt, right? For my son to be telling me he doesn't want me. He doesn't want to be around me. And I had to catch myself. I was building a wall against my son, right, against my 2-year-old son. I'm like, I won't let him get this close, only this close. And I had to pray about it. I'm like, God, I can't. I don't want to build this wall against my son. Like, what do I do? I had to forgive him, as ridiculous as it sounds. I had to forgive my 2-year-old for what he said. And I prayed and asked God, is it too early to talk to him about it? I wonder if he knows. And the Holy Spirit led me to talk to my son. I said, okay. I sat down with him one day. He was about 3 years old. I'm like, David, do you remember when your auntie came from Brazil to take care of you? And the first words out of his mouth were, why did you leave? So at this point, I knew he knew and that he remembered. So I took out my camera. I showed him the pictures of his brother. I said, look, this is what happened to your brother. And they thought that Mommy did this to him. And he immediately, cringed his face, furrowed his eyebrows. He's like, you never hurt us, Mommy. I'm like, I know, but they thought I did. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to tell this to a 3-year-old without creating, resentment and bitterness against authority and rebellion? So I'm going through it. I'm like, they thought they were doing their job, David. They just made a really bad choice. Okay, in every profession, there are some people who make bad choices. But I'm not going to let them get away with it. Okay, we're going to fight. And he looks at me. He's like, you going to hit them, Mommy? and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to hit them with a stack of papers. That's what we do. So at this point is when I contacted a civil rights attorney here in California. His name is Sean McMillan. Very well known here in this industry, right? In this type of case, this is all he does is CPS for civil rights violations. So I contacted him, told him the story. He took my case, and when we got the petition, I showed it to my son David. I'm like, look, see, here are the papers that we're going to hit them with. We signed it in front of him. We took it to the post office with him. He put it in the envelope. We prayed over the envelope, and we mailed it. So, he's been part of this process, and let me tell you, it was a complete 180. Okay, my son completely changed, and all he needed to know was that I loved him, right, and that I did not abandon him, that it was not my choice, that it was not his fault, and that we are together now. And I told him the final judge is God. Okay, God is going to judge these people. So we started the proceedings, and we filed the petition in May of 2017, and we settled in December of 2018. So we sued them for civil rights violation, 14th Amendment, 4th Amendment, and I believe it's the 5th Amendment. And now through discovery, oh my gosh, that's when all the stuff that they do gets revealed. We asked for the juvenile records, which aren't available until the children are 18. Everything is sealed, right? Everything is secret in this court. And the saying that they're protecting the minors, really they're just protecting their own butts.
Yeah.
So we get all the records. They come redacted, like 700 pages of redacted files.
I've got some redacted files. I know what that's like.
Yes. So my attorney's like, no, I have to make a motion to the judge to unredact them. And going through the records, we see that they gave David 13 vaccines at once without our consent, without a judicial order, without anything. They forced him through a full skeletal survey.
Oh, my gosh.
To make sure none of his bones were broken. Again, no consent, no warrant, no order. They did a anal wink test on him, which is for sexual abuse, when there really were no allegations of sexual abuse. But we see at this point, they're just digging for anything, right, that they can pin against us. So they did all these things to my son. We get the text messages between the social worker and her supervisor the night of. So before the social worker even got to the hospital, before she ever interviewed me, she tells her supervisor, I'm on my way to the hospital. There's an infant with a fracture. According to Mom, he was with the nanny. I'm going over to check it out right now. The supervisor replies, OMG, you think it was the nanny? And the social worker replies back, no, think Mom.
Yeah, they already have their minds set up when they arrive. It's been my experience. You're already the person who's done this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, that was mind-blowing to me to see it on paper. And, you hadn't even spoken to me. What is wrong with you people? And then the detectives, their communication with the police officer, they, too, had already made up their minds. And they were in communication with the social workers. And the detective is the one who told the social worker to seize both children without a warrant. So when we deposed them, my attorney's like, that's not legal, right? That you have to obtain a warrant. And the detectives, yes, but there are cases where if there's imminent threat or imminent exigent circumstances, we can do it without a warrant.
Yeah.
And my attorney, what were the exigent circumstances regarding David, right, the 20-month-old that was asleep in his grandma's house? And she's like, well, due to the siblings' injuries, we felt that the other sibling was in danger. And my attorney, well, that's not the legal standard. And what about the father? The father wasn't even in town. Why did you never consider placing the children with their father? Right? According to your policies, according to the law, you're supposed to take the least invasive, the least traumatic intervention that you can. Why didn't you give them to the father? And the detectives and the social workers, well, we didn't know. We couldn't prove that the father didn't know. And like, did you ask where he was? Yes. Did he tell you? Yes. Did it corroborate with the mother's story? Yes. So what more did you want? Like, I don't know. They could have been cooperating together. So they just, they've made up their minds, and they don't want to find the truth. They just want to be right.
Someone's listening to this. I don't want to interrupt you again, Ms. Bruno. but people are listening to this and they're thinking, well, why would the social worker already do this to you? Why would the detective get there and do that to you? What would be the benefit of doing this to you and your family?
Well, nothing new under the sun, right? Follow the money. And one thing I didn't mention when I was telling my story, before I had the hearing, and when they took my son at 2 o'clock in the morning, they took my son to the county children's shelter. And they wouldn't release them to us, right, because we were preparing for the hearing. But they did release my son to my mom, who was a public school teacher. She's a retired public school teacher, and her fingerprints, all that stuff was already in the system. So when they released my son David to my mom, they asked her, before I even had the hearing, will you adopt your grandchildren? And my mom nearly fell off her chair. She's like, no, give them back to their mom, to whom they rightfully belong. And the social worker said, well, we don't know what the judge is going to order at the hearing. So if he orders the removal of the children, you would be able to adopt them, and you'll receive $670 a month per child. You will be eligible for food stamps and for all the WIC benefits here in California, all the social service, the social welfare stuff that they give.
Okay, so the social worker in the middle of the night is telling your traumatized mother, who's freaking out probably at this point because her husband's recovering from surgery, her daughter is an epileptic with 2 new baby. Okay, so your mom's in this mindset where she's an older lady getting this horrible information, and she's also being told that if she goes along with this, basically, she will be eligible for food stamps and government money.
Right. And my mom, again, I don't want your money. And the social worker, well, this is the way we help you. And my mom actually told her, like, can I save the checks for the lawyer? Can I pay the lawyers with these checks? And the social worker's like, I'll pretend I didn't hear that. So ultimately, my mom did sign adoption papers before I ever had a hearing. Never listened to my side of the story, my husband's side of the story, nothing. Right? And this is how they operate. So this is all due to a law called the Adoption and Safe Families Act, which was signed by Bill Clinton in 1997. And it incentivizes states to put children from foster care up for adoption. It speeds up that process and gives the state money from the federal government for every child that is placed in foster care and adopted. The state gets anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 per child. Right, so while my mom was getting offered the $670, most likely they were getting upwards of $2,000 for each child.
Wow. Okay, so the state is going to take a child, place the child with its non-biological or her or his non-biological parent, hopefully a family member. Not always a family member, though. A lot of family members are denied the right to adopt their own kin. So the state gets to pocket more than half the money allocated to care for the children that are removed.
Right. So, and they claim, it's for all the services, for the psychologists, for the social workers, for the food, for whatever, all the stuff.
For the anal examination and the cranial testing. Yeah, for your child to be traumatized.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
When really all the child wants is to go home. And I don't know, I thought about this, I grew up in church hearing about foster care, and as far as we knew, foster care is like the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Right.
Right? And we're supposed to help them, and have workshops on how to become a foster parent, and let's put the backpacks together to donate, and all these things during Christmas, you know the drill.
Yeah.
And after living this, I'm like, oh my gosh, these people have no idea.
Nope.
And I mean, I will claim ignorance myself. I had no idea. Like I said from the beginning, I'm like, I'm thinking I'm going into a real court, that there's going to be a trial, that there's going to be a jury, that I'm going to be read my rights, that I'm going to be cross-examined, all that stuff.
There's going to be depositions. Yeah.
Right. And people don't realize that family court doesn't work that way. And when they're fostering a child, they think, this parent must have done something really bad to have gotten this child taken away.
Yeah, you're horrible. You're on supervised visits. You're a mom. You must be a crackhead or a hooker or
exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they don't realize that these people lie through their teeth. And take my case, for example. A potential foster parent, what would they hear? That this 7-week-old baby endured a cranial fracture while in the care of his abusive mother.
And then she tried to blame the nanny.
Right. And then, he has a 20-month-old sibling. Will you please help these children? So if you're only hearing that, then you're like, of course, keep this monster away from these children.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I really think, we have to re-educate your listeners, starting with your listeners, starting, with anybody that will be willing to listen to my story. That's really my ultimate goal, is to re-educate our citizens and also prepare parents, know your rights. If you go to my website at www.rachelbruno.com, you can download a little PDF version that I created of what I learned, 5 little pointers that I learned throughout this process and what you can do to protect yourself if you ever find yourself in this terrible situation. And I will be writing a book, which should be coming out in the summer of 2020. So if you sign up on my website, you get first dibs. And, I've told this story a gazillion times, and as I'm telling it, I stick to the facts. I try to just get the facts out and get the story out. But in my book, you'll really hear my heart.
Yeah, I'm getting more emotional than you are while you're relaying this.
Right. Yeah, so I know. I've told it so many times.
Yeah, you're solid, girl.
You'll definitely cry on the book.
You are solid. Because it is very hard to divorce yourself from the emotion and the triggering and the grief and the anger and the just disbelief that this is happening to you while you're going through it, and that you turn to all of these organizations. I don't know if you called places like ACLU or I don't know, if you're a Republican, you call your GOP people. If you're Democrat, you call the Democrats that are running things. You're calling all these different organizations that you think are going to come to defend you and help you and step in, and basically everybody's like, oh yeah, we don't do custody. We don't do
exactly.
Yeah, we don't do custody cases.
No. As soon as you mention family court, they're like, nope.
No. And meanwhile, that's where this is happening. That's where I think I read 200,000 children are placed through CPS services and family court each year. That's 200,000 children, defenseless children, who now are at risk. They can be trafficked. They can be, trafficked by their foster parents. They can be used for money by their foster parents. Child pornography is it's not even child pornography. Let's call it what it is. Child sex abuse that's being shared online. So your children can be lost to a situation where they will be impacted through the rest of their lives. They're going to have higher chances of wanting to kill themselves, diabetes, cancer, substance use disorders. All kinds of things come from these situations. And we have the research to prove that's what's going to happen to these kids. And yet the media does not share this information. Parents are gag ordered. Parents are suicidal after going through this. They don't want to fight back because they lose everything that they've owned, and then are becoming destitute, trying to pay attorneys if they can find an attorney to fight back. And then they still lose because the system does not want the parent to win. So if we don't talk about this and actually come together as a nation of individuals, how do we fix it?
Right. Absolutely. I'm like, if I had a magic wand, I would just abolish family court as it is right now. Right? Because there really is no need for it. Child abuse is criminal already.
Exactly.
Right? That's already in the law. So if you are going to be charged with child abuse, then go to the federal court and, go through the whole legal process that we have outlined in our Constitution.
There to save children and parents.
Right. And yet, this family court thing was created just to subvert the Constitution, really. All in, the ways that they are protecting the children, protecting minors. That's why everything is confidential. And it's not. They just want to protect their own butts. There is no transcript. There are no court reporters. There's no media allowed. There's nothing allowed inside those courtrooms. Nobody knows what happens behind those closed doors.
Hey, I've been sexually assaulted by my attorney, who he's not denied it because it actually took place. So I don't want to hijack your story because this is your interview, and I'm really glad you're here, Rachel Bruno, and I have a lot of respect and love and admiration for you. But I don't think people actually understand. I can't find someone to sue my attorney for sexual assault. I have proof. I have documentation. I have a witness. He propositioned he wanted to have a 3-way with us. She's never been interviewed because he's a politician in the state and I don't think people understand you can be sexually assaulted by the person supervising your custodial visits. I didn't have access to even see my child for over a year because of the sexual assault, because the guy who assaulted me was supervising my visits. And I still have no recourse. He's still practicing law. He is still a city councilman. And the media won't put the story out because it's attached to family court. That's how bad this is.
Yes, it is. It's a bad epidemic. Our society's sweet little secret, very dark little secret that we have, and nobody is aware of it.
Nobody. And I'm glad you are out there actually advocating and fighting and getting your story out, and you do have a happy ending because you sued and won. And I think that's where we're going with this, because these kids are going to age up too. These children are going to age up, and now that we're taking the statute of limitation restrictions off the books in many states, now your 18-year-old can come back and sue the people who took him away from mommy.
Right.
Yeah. And so what you're doing is actually the future, Rachel Bruno. It might be too late for me and my kid, but you are going to, I think change lawyers' minds, especially because once good lawyers who are willing to put themselves out there to do the jobs that they have taken oaths to do, will start seeing, I can sue California for $4 million and win.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. And that's a lot better than nickel and diming and making all of this evil permeate our culture.
It was really hard for me. We had to settle. Our attorney suggested that we settle back in 2018. Our trial was actually scheduled for June 6th of 2019.
Ugh. Thank you so much, Rachel Bruno, for taking the time to come down and speak with my listeners and me. I really appreciate it, especially because things are so polarized right now, and you are MAGA and I am not MAGA, and we're supposed to hate one another and not speak. And it's a good thing when we do talk, because we find out a lot of information that we wouldn't have otherwise. And the hating each other is stupid. The kids need us, y'all. Please look for Rachel Bruno, rachelbruno.com. Check out her book, get on her newsletter, keep in touch with her. She's on Twitter. And I'm at lisalandry.com. Please do sign up for my YouTube channel, support my work. It don't cost you nothing. And I am happy to have you. You'll know when each new podcast drops every Woman is Wednesday.